I think everybody is aware right now that there is just a disaster unfolding just up north of where I'm at right now, and just south of Washington D.C., up in the Capitol building with this whole just embarrassment for our country that's unfolding with the House of Representatives and the vacation of the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, and now scramble to try to find a new one. That's unless you've been living under a rock, everybody's aware of what's going on there, but one thing you might not be aware of is exactly how we got into this mess. Now, a lot of the major news channels right now are going to be covering, a lot of the policy issues that are going on, maybe some of the backroom things that are happening here, and the secret deals that may or may not be going on. And all those things have their place. But there's some things that you may know and some things you may not know about how this actually even came to pass and how it could come to pass. And that's more importantly, what it portends for the future. Now, to find out how we got to this point to where McCarthy was voted out just about 24 hours ago, let's go back to the 2022 congressional elections, because that's where this issue started. Now, you may recall that heading into that election, a lot of Republicans were confidently talking about, a red wave that was going to come rolling over and just undo all these gains that the Democrats had made, and there was going to be a huge majority, and didn't quite turn out that way. It actually turned out to be a razor thin majority. And the numbers, at least as of today, especially, are 221 to 212 Republican to Democrat. Now, what that means in practical terms is that you can't lose for the Republicans any more than 5 votes, or you're going to have a hard time passing any kind of legislation. And we've seen that from the outset of this. It is so hard to keep the Republican Party itself together because they are so fractious. They have so many different segments and so many different things that are important to various members or various groups of members. It is really hard to keep them unified. And especially when you get some issues that within the Republican conference itself, there's a lot of disparity and dispute on what's going on, especially on this Ukraine funding issue. That's been the thorn in the side of the Republican Party, really, for this whole Congress, and remains so to this day, and played a very outsized role in what happened with McCarthy. So when you know that you're not going to be able to get anything done unless you hold that House together, and of course, as also most of you know, it took 15 rounds to get McCarthy agreed onto it. So it was hard to get McCarthy even signed in, Sarah, which really from the outset just hamstrung his ability, because in order to be the Speaker of the House, to get things done, you got to be able to, frankly, you got to be able to manhandle and roughhouse some people behind the scenes to get them on board with whatever the party is doing, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. The Speaker has to be able to strong arm some people to get things done. Otherwise, you're just going to have complete chaos. You'll just have, trying to herd cats, as they say. And that has been McCarthy's, very, very difficult job from the outset. Well, now that was complicated because of as to some, he's either the villain or the hero, Matt Gaetz. And because of this razor thin margin here, and the fact that you could only lose 5 votes to get anything done, in some cases only 4, Matt Gaetz had his little band of about 7 or 8 loyal people who would be following him. So you have this otherwise outsized power being given to this really small group of unified members, because they have more power than it takes to get that razor thin edge, as long as the Democrats on their side continue to vote as a bloc. Now, the Democratic Party itself is also very fractious, but the fact that they see that the Republicans are having trouble, they're going to keep their fractures in line as long as it causes trouble for the Republican majority. Because look, this is politics, good or bad, right or wrong. This is the way it works here. If I can do anything that can make my opponent look bad, then the next election, I'll have a chance to win more seats. Now, I personally hate that dynamic. It doesn't matter about the American people so much as it matters about me winning the next election. So ultimately, that was all that was needed to get rid of McCarthy. If you had this polarizing issue, the Ukraine funding for the budget to try to get a CR, a continuing resolution passed, and Gaetz took that opportunity to use that to say, no, accused McCarthy of making a secret deal with Biden and his fiery defense on the day that the vote was taken, and the Democrats did their part. voted as a block, and now then you don't have a speaker. However, now there's one very interesting thing that you may not know is that a lot of this appears to possibly have been set up beforehand. Now, look at this short clip from, I believe, the Washington Post. It explains a little bit about what happened prior to all of this stuff being set up in terms of what Gaetz may have been planning.
McCarthy had to make some serious concessions to win the votes of members from the Freedom Caucus, some of the most conservative-leaning members of the GOP, including Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida.
Present.
Of the known concessions, McCarthy agreed to change the motion to vacate rule. The motion to vacate is the ability to force votes to eject a speaker. Previous House Speaker, number 53, John Boehner, resigned before having to face such a vote in 2015.
It's become clear to me that this prolonged leadership turmoil would do irreparable harm to the institution. So this morning I informed my colleagues that I would resign from the speakership and resign from Congress at the end of October.
House Speaker number 52, Nancy Pelosi, changed from allowing any member to demand a vote to recall the speaker to requiring that a member of leadership do so, and there must be a majority agreement from the caucus to force such a vote. McCarthy agreed to lower the threshold for bringing the motion in order to shore up support to become Speaker in January. After McCarthy partnered with Democrats to pass spending legislation to fund the government, Gaetz introduced a resolution to remove McCarthy as House Speaker.
Look, I think Matt has planned this all along. It didn't matter what we transpired. You know, he would have done it if we were in shutdown or not. I firmly believe it's the right decision to keep government open, to make sure our military is still paid, our border agents are still paid. And if that makes a challenge based upon whether I should be Speaker, I'll take that fight.
Let me let everyone know he prevailed in that Speaker contest because he made an agreement to fulfill certain commitments to make this an open and honest process, and he has failed to meet those commitments, and that's why we are here.
With zero support from Democrats and a handful of members in his own caucus voting against him, Kevin McCarthy was removed as Speaker in a 216 to 210 vote.
So we can only guess at what's going on in Matt Gaetz' mind and what he is planning. But when you realize that he, as part of the negotiations to allow McCarthy to be voted in on the 15th round when he sought his speakership, you have to ask the logical question, why would you have done that? Why would you want that particular order changed so that only one person, i.e. him, could actually, spark the process to get rid of the speaker? It basically kept a Damocles sword over McCarthy throughout the whole term that he was in office. And of course, we've seen this. If you've been following the Congress closely, and certainly the dynamics within the Republican Party, there's been constant friction between Gaetz and McCarthy, because I think he's had this hanging over his head. And now then he decided, for whatever reasons, I'm sure it'll be years before we know all the things that were going on behind the scenes, but for whatever reason, he decided to pull the trigger. Now then we have what we have. So the issue is, what's done is done. The question is, where do we go from here? What's next? Well, now currently the next thing that's going to happen is a week from yesterday. So next Wednesday is going to be the first time that the House is going to meet to elect a new Speaker of the House. And of course, we have no idea of knowing how that's going to go. If that's going to be more contentious as well, is that going to be, another long process? Because you can't avoid the fact that Gaetz is still there and he still has this group. And if he keeps them together, it's going to be very difficult to elect a new speaker. Well, who do we have to choose from? Who might we be possible? And perhaps will these people be any more effective than McCarthy has been? Well, let's look at who the options are in this NBC report. Two that you probably know, and one may be a little surprising to a lot of people.
The House won't return to vote on a new leader until next week. Already jumping into the race, current number 2 Republican Steve Scalise.
And this is really important that we get this right.
And conservative firebrand Jim Jordan.
I feel like I can unite the conservative voters across the country.
Overnight, former President Trump posting, "Why is it that Republicans are always fighting among themselves? Why aren't they fighting the radical left Democrats?" Now some lawmakers floating his name for the job, too.
A lot of people have been calling me about Speaker. I'll do whatever it is to help, but my total focus is being president.
Until there's a speaker, critical work is left to languish, including another potential shutdown showdown just 44 days away.
And that really is one of the big issues. That's why this makes this whole process still so much on edge. It's almost like the climax of the event was getting rid of McCarthy, but that actually may have just been one of the precursors. The climax is probably still to come because there is still so much turmoil within the Republican Party itself, as this NBC News article demonstrates.
The only certainty among most Republicans today, their disdain for colleague Matt Gaetz, who led the charge to remove McCarthy.
I think it was deplorable. I think it was disgraceful. And he put his own petty personal grievances ahead of the country.
Gaetz today continued to attack his colleagues.
The nerve of these establishment Republicans to have to take a week to go have a good cry and then blame us for being the reason that we can't get the work done.
The leadership vacuum and overall paralysis in the House is raising new worries about crashing into the new November 17th deadline to fund the government and avert a government shutdown. Also in danger, funding for Ukraine, which was left out of last weekend's deal to avert a shutdown. The Pentagon warning Congress this week that it's running out of money to replace weapons it sent to Ukraine. Any new speaker will have to contend with a growing number of House Republicans who think it's time to turn off the spigot.
And therein lies your problem. You have, regardless of who is elected Speaker of the House, and it's not going to be Trump. I can just tell you that he's running for president, and to be Speaker of the House is a very, very time-consuming job, and you got to do a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, and you have to have a lot of good negotiating and diplomatic skills in the knowledge of how the House works. And Trump has none of those things or the interest in working hard like that. He wants to be president. So you can be sure that that's not going to happen. So it's probably going to be Jordan or Scalise, both of whom have been around a long time, both of whom have a lot of respect among the Republican conference itself. But then you also saw Gaetz, lay down that marker again by ridiculing and mocking his fellow Republicans about going home and having a good cry and all this. So it still is very, very tense situation. And we come in, we have November 17th is just around the corner, and we could have another government shutdown. And the same issue is going to be a big sticking point of being the money for Ukraine, and whether it should be continued on, whether it should be reduced, whether it should be going on at a high level. There's a lot of different views on that, even within the Republican Party. And you have the president is very strong advocate of continuing on, and so is the Democratic Party in general. So the dynamics could play out somewhat different and even be more fractious. And look, there's a reason why respect for Congress among the American people continues to drop to new lows. And this is certainly going to be adding to it because, look, most Americans, like you, I would gather, certainly me, sit around and we go to work every day. We do our jobs. And a lot of us have jobs we don't like. A lot of us have, even on jobs you do like, you have periods where it's difficult. You don't want to go to work. You have a problem with your coworker. And guess what? For Americans, it don't matter. You go to work, you do your job, you get your paycheck. If you don't, then you leave. You can quit and go try to find yourself another job. But what you can't do is to stay on the payroll and to just obstruct everything and not get anything done. No one's going to pay for that. So it's more and more frustrating for Americans of all political stripes to look on this situation and say, why can't you guys just do like the rest of the country does? We send you up there. We hire you through our voting process to go up and do a job, to protect our needs and to just get business done. Just the normal stuff. I mean, there's a lot of difficult issues that have to be negotiated and dealt with. But for the most part, there's just regular business that could be done. But you can't even do that. And it's making America more and more frustrated. And it's also making us look worse and worse in the eyes of the world, both our friends and our adversaries. And we're going to talk about that in a separate deep dive itself, because there's a lot more to that than you may realize too. And the stakes are a little higher than it might appear on the surface. But even what does appear on the surface is a big issue, and it's time to get this resolved and taken care of. And I honestly, I don't have any answers for you today about how we're going to do this, but I can tell you that the more and more Americans are getting really fed up with what's going on in Congress. And these guys live in an alternative reality. It's like they don't live in the real world that the rest of us do. And that's going to come to an end one of these days, one way or another. Now, that's where we are right now. And with so many things still on the table, and boy, next week is going to be the next chapter in this unfolding ugly drama. And Deep Dive will be right here to give you the inside scoop of what's really going on, the things that you really need to know. Thanks for showing up today, and we'll see you on the next episode.